with Mr. Bob Lee. It's been a while, but he's back. And Mr. Bob, what is going on?
Well, I got some breaking news for you, Gene, and for your listeners, viewers, readers down there in Chatham County. I know people moved to Chatham County to kind of get out of the mainstream and get away from it. So they may not have heard this big news, Gene, and I hope you're sitting down because it's a big one.
Okay, I am sitting down.
Okay, Carolina did not make the big dance. And number two, if you can handle that, Carolina turned down the NIT. Whoa. I know you probably haven't heard that.
They turned down the NIT.
Third rock from the sun that hasn't heard that. So now I've told them.
Now, what is the NIT? I think in one of your articles you brought that up. There's what, maybe 50 people out of the billions of people in the whole world that even know what the NIT is.
Correct, but they all are really upset and think Carolina should be given the death penalty and salt the fields of Chapel Hill because they turned down the opportunity to go there. And I wrote about it, and you saw it, and you know me enough that when I say I'm not kidding, folks, I'm not kidding. One she critic of Carolina, who's apparently a state fan, I assume, went into a rant that the decision to turn down the NIT was going to have adverse effect on the youth of America because it was going to teach them that you can quit if you have a bad season. And she seemed serious, which really kind of scares me, Gene. That turning down the NIT, and I'm sure she had no clue what the NIT stood for, National Invitational Tournament, of course, or not in the tournament, whichever way you want to go with that. That she really thought that would be just a horrible example for the youth of America, who are dealing enough with what gender they are and all these other issues that they've got to deal with, and whether to take a school voucher and be homeschooled or whatnot. Now they've got to deal with Carolina told us it was okay to quit if you're doing bad.
There seems to be a bunch of discussion about that, and for folks that don't know, Mr. Bob Lee's got inside track as to what some of these things are going on. So what's your full assessment as to, hey, is this good or bad? I know our buddies Joe and Joe over there, they're kind of like, you know what, the chemistry wasn't there. I've had the opportunity the last couple of weeks of doing the ACC basketball tournaments and listening to the sports writers. Most of them, it was kind of interesting because someone who hasn't ever watched the UNC is like, hey, on their first night when they won, it's like, hey, they're a pretty impressive team. They could go at all. And then there's others like, hey, they just don't have the chemistry this year. So what's your assessment of the whole UNC?
Well,
and do most people even care?
Most people, well, that gets into something Dean Smith, St. Dean, born in a manger, rose on the third day, that he said about 30 years ago. He made a famous statement about people overemphasizing and caring too much about Carolina basketball 30 years ago, before the internet. And he said 8 billion Chinese really don't care. Well, Dean was wrong because, one, there are only 1.4 billion Chinese today, and I don't think we lost 6.5 billion of them in the last few years to the Wuhan virus or whatever happened to 7 billion Chinese. But Dean was obviously wrong because apparently all 1.4 billion of those care, and pretty much everybody on the face of the earth cares about Carolina and their decision about the NIT after, of course, having this train wreck of a season that kept them out of the tournament, which is their divine right to go. It is the divine right of Carolina basketball and its fans to go to the big dance, and somehow that didn't get through to the committee that are made up obviously of Carolina haters, ABCers for sure, made an entire committee that said they couldn't go because they wanted to be the only team, only preseason number one, which, by the way, I agree. They should have been preseason number one with 4 starters coming back from the team that was within 12 minutes of winning the national championship. That's not even an issue. Now, the fact that they're the first preseason number one to not make it, obviously everybody knows that's the first time that's ever happened. I think the reason they chose not to go to the NIT was out of respect to Bill Chamberlain. Now, you weren't around then, but do you know, because you read my column, who Bill Chamberlain was?
Actually, I do, because I read your column, and I think at one time, I was a whole lot
I've been writing a lot of columns, Gene.
Yeah, well, Bill Chamberlain was still. I'm familiar with the name, so yes.
Okay. Bill Chamberlain was the second black player to be put on scholarship at Carolina. He was 1 year behind Charlie Scott. Charlie Scott obviously was number one. Actually, the first black player to wear a Carolina uniform was a guy named Willie Cooper from Four Oaks, North Carolina, who was a walk-on the freshman team in 1964. But Charlie was number one. Bill Chamberlain was number two. And in either 70 or 70, when he came in, he was with the Dennis White, Steve Previs team. That helps. Jim Delaney, Eddie Fogler. No, that was a year after that. Anyway, Bill Chamberlain, Carolina went to the NIT that year. I think South Carolina won the ACC tournament and got the automatic bid. And there were only 16 teams that played in the big dance. It wasn't a very big dance back then, either 70 or 71, probably 70. And they played in the NIT. They played against the UMass team that had a guy named Julius Irving. You may have heard of him, Dr. J. And they beat him. And Bill Chamberlain was the most valuable player of the NIT. And I think they were probably afraid that Leaky Black would maybe usurp him and become the second Carolina NIT MVP or whatnot. But anyway, that was part of it. It was out of respect for Bill Chamberlain that 50 years later, he will still be the only UNC basketball player to be the most valuable player in the National Invitational Tournament. There you have it.
Well, what was you talked about the one Chief fan that was, hey, really upset about it, but what was your feelings about folks that are saying, hey, they should have gone to NIT, and if the starters, the regular starters did not want to play, that's fine, just let the subs play.
That was if Hubert had called me, and once again he didn't, neither Hubert nor Bubba called me, but I waited by the phone, that I would have said the only reason to go is not because your 4 players and 5 players need another game experience to make them better, because they're basically all gone. But the reserves that have not had much playing time this year, and of course Hubert's gotten a lot of criticism for that he recruited all these kids, and 4 or 5 kids, and basically none of them have got playing time, that let them play in the NIT, because really nobody cares whether they won or not. Of course, some Carolina fan might have cared, but nobody else would have. But they would have played the bench guys, the biscuit boys. But now the biscuit boys are all transferring. I think 2 of them have so far. Nickel, the white kid that's supposed to be a good shooter, and I think one other player, McCoy, may have. I'm not following it hour by hour, but I would think the Styles kid from Kingston would probably transfer. And that's just in today's world with the transfer portal. If you don't get playing time, what's the point of being there? I mean, they're not all there to be dentists and lawyers and orthopedic surgeons. They're there to play basketball and pursue that. And if Hubert, for whatever reason, isn't going to play a very deep bench or a bench at all, then why stick around when they can go, if not to another Division I school, at least to somewhere, Elon, Campbell, somewhere in probably not Furman or Princeton, and get some playing time. That's what they wanted. They want to play, and he didn't play them. And it was a long way from Dean and his famous blue team of the mid '70s. And so the idea that they would get to play in the NIT because he was going to bench the guys that couldn't throw the ball in the ocean, it only worked if you were going to play the other guys, and maybe he knew they were all going to leave. Now, if they were still playing, I don't think they could have announced they were leaving. I'm not sure. But when they announced they weren't going to play, then at least 2 of them have said they're out of here. And I would imagine there'll be a couple of others. So other than that, I saw no reason for them to play in it other than to avoid the criticism that had descended upon them like a pandemic because they chose not to. Now, the people that the vast world of ABCers, and that's another point. I didn't realize that the Carolina ABC world was as big nationally as Duke's. Everybody knows that everybody outside of West Durham, and I don't mean Woody's son, I mean west part of Durham, North Carolina, hates Duke because Coach Krzyzewski looked like a rat, and Christian Laettner and J.J. Redick were Christian Laettner and J.J. Redick. So for that reason, every basketball fan, everybody's Aunt Clara and Creighton Cutting hates Duke. I didn't realize they also hate Carolina for whatever reason. Maybe it was a scandal or whatever. Maybe it was Tyler Hansbrough. I don't know what, but apparently they all hate Carolina now. And we're delighted when Carolina finally got their comeuppance by being the first preseason number 1 to not make the tournament. And no one will ever be the first one. next one will be the second one. Remember, Carolina did this way back yonder in 2023, but Carolina will always be the first one to do that. And that apparently delighted a whole lot of people who descended on social media with a vengeance and are posting all kinds and still doing it. I mean, it's been a week now and they're still going, yeah. You know, Carolina didn't make the tournament. Like there's anybody on Franklin Street that's not aware of that. So it was a big deal to the nation. I noticed the one sports website I go to is Outkick, Clay Travis's Outkick, which is half soft porn and half message boards. But they just had a feast with this. This has been like a feast, like a herd of hyenas descending upon a dead white-tailed deer, if they're a white-tailed deer in Africa, I don't know. But anyway, just chewing up alive that Carolina finally got what was due to them because all their alumni are all a bunch of jerks, egotistical, elitist jerks. It's really been fascinating to me the response of the nation to this. I don't think Joe Biden has said yet, yeah, Carolina didn't make the tournament, but maybe quietly he did, and he just doesn't know there's a tournament. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because NC State, you would figure they jumped on that right aboard, sure. But I was surprised, as you said, as to how much hate came out about it. And I think also, ACC has gotten beat up for the last couple of years. The fact that Virginia lost their first game is kind of like, oops. And I think Governor Roy Cooper had them picked to go a little bit further.
He and Jay Billis both have picked Arizona to win it all. I mean, Jay Billis is everybody's favorite analyst now. But no, Jay Billis picked Arizona to win it, and so did Governor Cooper. So much for their brackets.
Speaking, you mentioned Hubert hadn't reached out to you. I think in one of your columns you mentioned that Bubba actually needs to reach out to Larry Brown as a senior advisor.
No. Larry Brown, bless his heart, people who don't know, played for Dean Smith in the early 60s and then coached the fabulous freshman team of Rusty Clark, Bill Bunning, Dick Grubar, Richard Tuttle, and Gerald Tuttle and Joe Brown in 1965-66 season. That was when they took out a freshman team, and Larry Brown coached them, and they only lost one game that year, and that was up at Virginia Tech, but I digress. But since then, Larry Brown has gone out. He won a national championship by stealing Danny Manning from hiring Danny Manning's father, and thereby stealing Danny Manning to win the national championship at Kansas right before Roy went in there. Larry Brown he coached for like 7 or 8 or 10 or a dozen NBA teams. I called him Larry Suitcase Brown because he basically lived out of a suitcase most of his career. And he is the only living person that has to wear one of those little ankle bracelet things by the NCAA goon squad so they know where he is 24/7, because wherever he is, they're going to go into NCAA jail within 2 days after he gets on that campus. And Carolina doesn't need that now. So let's not bring in Larry Brown as a senior consultant. Last place he was doing that was in Memphis with Penny Hardaway. And they got in trouble immediately after he got there. Coincidence? Well, maybe, but it seems to follow. It followed him to SMU, followed him to UCLA. Bless his heart. And Larry, when they nail him, he does a crying gig at the news conference. Well, I didn't know. I didn't help the kids. And I'm just trying to help them get an education and go out in the world and discover a cure for cancer. And they don't want me. They're picking on me. And Doug Moe, go beat them up. Yeah, what the heck? But anyway, I do have inside sources, but I don't ask them questions because they're pretty busy right now getting suggestions from everybody in the UNC fan base. Apparently has the answer. Now, Gene, I have been fortunate to be around successful basketball since I was a freshman in high school. My senior years, we were 51-1, and Kingston won back-to-back state championships, and then around Carolina and stuff. So I've been around big-time basketball, successful basketball, and today I have no idea what a ball screen is. I have no idea about the intricacies of basketball. I know the team with the better players and the better coaches tend to win more, and the referees hate all of them. Another aside that I mentioned, for the 45th consecutive year, all 64 teams that started out, of course, they've eliminated a fourth of them now, but all the 64 teams got put into the worst bracket. And you may not know this, Gene, because you don't deal in the dark side of the web, but all 64 of those teams know that the NCAA, the referees, and ESPN hate their school. Apparently, they're all those three entities are jealous of every school that's in the tournament because that school is so cool, and their alumni are so cool, and they have really cool bell towers on the campus. So the NCAA puts them all in the worst bracket, the hardest, most unfair bracket. And this is the 45th consecutive year that has been the case. Next year will be the 46th.
Well, don't they pick members for the selection committee to specifically be against your favorite school?
Absolutely. Years ago, and of course, Stuart Scott's passed away now, and John Skipper, alias Skippy the Cokehead, has been fired. Both of those were Carolina people who were influential at ESPN. I did a thing, probably 15 years ago, that when Stuart Scott was still very prominent and whatnot, doing his cool side of the pillow thing, that every Monday morning at 6:30, Stuart Scott would call a meeting in Bristol, Connecticut, and they would plan that week's way to say bad and negative things about NC State. There are state people that still believe that, I think, that ESPN had it in for NC State. Incidentally, I have a good friend who I talked with yesterday and tried to talk him off the ledge, who's a Purdue graduate, a Purdue alum. He goes way back to Gene Cady and Rick Mount and everything other. There are two people two or three players that Purdue's had that have been famous, Rick Mount being one of them, back at the same time that Pete Maravich and Calvin Murphy were scoring a lot. But we talked about why he thinks ESPN, of course, hates Purdue because that's his school and they're number one, but they don't talk about them for 20 minutes every Monday morning. So that means they hate our school. And we talked about it. I said, John, his name is John. Purdue is kind of like NC State. It doesn't have a big national name or brand. Carolina does. Indiana does. And of course, Indiana is to Purdue what Carolina is to NC State. Both of them are state schools. Purdue and NC State are both STEM schools, very good engineering and those arts. Carolina and Indiana are liberal arts schools. And they dominate the alumni and the media in their states and represent their states to the world as the basketball school in their state. So the Purdue people just feel like NC State people, that nobody knows about them, nobody cares about them, and the people who do care about them hate them.
Well, you mentioned those schools, and they seem to sometimes feel that they get shortchanged, but you mentioned
24 hours a day they get shortchanged. Go ahead.
Look, I'm going to get in trouble for laughing. You do mention, though, in one of your recent articles, the curse of Silent Sam. For folks who are not aware of the curse of Silent Sam, tell them who Silent Sam is, because I guess Silent Sam is no longer there. I think there's a famous picture of Jordan standing with another teammate in front of the Silent Sam statue. And just give folks who may not know who Silent Sam is or the curse of Silent Sam, what is the scoop about Silent Sam and UNC?
Silent Sam, and I find it hard to believe that nobody in the state of North Carolina or Chatham County particularly that wouldn't have done know Silent Sam was a statue of a Confederate soldier that was in a very prominent place in I want to say Polk Place, the big campus-wide open field area right on Franklin Street. There's Polk Place and McCorkle Place. I think that is Polk Place. But anyway, it's the big one right there. As you drive down Franklin Street, you look on your left if you're going down Franklin Street. And this was a Confederate statue. It's like the same Confederate statue that was all over the South. Kingston had one. Not for wages, not for glory, 'twas for home and right they fell. Don't ask me why I memorized that, but it used to be at one of our recreation areas in Kingston. It's now out on a battlefield somewhere in the area. But anyway, Silent Sam was there forever and ever and ever. And the lore or the myth about it was he would fire his gun if a virgin ever walked by. And of course, a virgin never walked by, so he never fired his gun. In Missouri, it's the columns are going to fall if a virgin ever walked by. So every college has something that's going to happen if there's ever a virgin on campus. So anyway, Carolina's was this statue was going to fire his Civil War weapon. And for years, I guess, I don't know, 20 years, it's been stuck in the craw of one of Chapel Hill's various radical factions, and there were like 412 of them at last count, that wanted to get rid of Silent Sam because it was an insult to them, I guess, to the slaves or whatever else it was. And they finally got it about, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago. They were able to get up enough steam to have the statue removed, and create all kind of hubbub with people who actually pay the bills at Carolina. The big Rams and whatnot were against it, but it got moved, and there was a couple of demonstrations, and people did stupid things and whatnot, but it got moved to some secret place, and they wouldn't reveal where it was, and that became kind of a story. And I think it's been moved to a second secret place since then. I don't think it's been put on a battlefield, but it might have been sent to Bentonville, which was the biggest battle in North Carolina, in Bentonville down near Fayetteville. But that was the story of Silent Sam, and everybody has an opinion about it. Most of the old grads, thought it was just horrible, and that was kind of the way that cut the ties of many old grads, particularly who are not of the radical liberal persuasion, which most old grads are not, by the way. The idea that all Carolina alums are crazy lunatic liberals has never been true. The ones that are, I'd say by the time they're 25, they turned in their Birkenstocks for wingtips, and they're trying to work on Wall Street. So they get rid of that pretty soon. Although with the current millennials, it may be sticking around a little bit longer, that they realize that with their gender studies, master's degree in gender studies, they don't get any more to work at McDonald's than someone who went to community college gets to work at McDonald's. But the moving of Silent Sam, the idea that you better not do this is going to come back to bite you in the butt, apparently happened. That this was the way that Silent Sam said, aha, I told you not to move me, and now you're doomed to never make the tournament again. Your divine right to be an elite basketball program has been rescinded because you made me move. And of course, the point I brought up right before then was the one I liked. But what I like is never what my readers like. My readers love the Silent Sam thing. But the one I liked was the line before that, which says Carolina is now a field hockey school. I thought there'd be the Johnny T-shirt, and Carolina Sportswear should come out with a whole line of T-shirts that say Carolina is a field hockey school, because they're very successful in field hockey. And of course, they used to be successful in basketball, but apparently never again. So say many.
Yeah, I looked it up while you were speaking. The statue came down in 2018. So you're right, it was about five years ago. So, and I did see the thing about the field hockey as well. A couple other things you had written about. And before we get into that, you mentioned Kingston several times, and I know you had that connection last year. That article came out on Kingston, and you referenced it. And we haven't talked in about a year's time. Has there been any follow-up on the Kingston story, or any changes that you want to make folks aware of?
The last top player is this kid that's playing now on Carolina's bench, Styles, Dante Styles, I think his name is. He's the last graduate of that program. What it was an article that Andrew Carter, one of the 2 or 3 reporters still left at the News and Observer. Maybe he's the only one still left. Who knows? I don't even see the News and Observer in Harris Teeter anymore, much less I haven't received it for 15 years. But I don't think I missed anything. I think I could still go on Jeopardy about today's news and do pretty well without the News Observer or WRAL for that matter. But Andrew Carter did a three-part series about Kingston. It has more NBA alumni, NBA players from natives of Kingston than any place on earth. So Kingston has 20,000 people. And something like 10 or 12 NBA alumni, going all the way back to Cedric Cornbread Maxwell. And then, of course, Jerry Stackhouse was one of the more famous ones. And then Brandon Ingram, who's a top player now in the NBA. Reggie Bullock, who went to Carolina, and I think he's a journeyman in the NBA now. But there were a number of them. They were like 8 or 10 that have come out of Kingston. The rec center's over there in that part of town of Kingston. And gone on being inspired by the guys that went, don't forget Charles Amphibious Shackelford. He was in there somewhere. Most people need to leave him out, the late Charles Amphibious Shackelford. But anyway, they've had an incredible number for the size of the community. Incredible number that have gone on to legitimately play in the NBA. And he did an article about that. Now, the problem that he did is my junior and senior years, we were 51-1, back-to-back state championships in the middle 60s. Cornbread Maxwell did not come along until 74, 75. Of course, went to UNC Charlotte and played in the same Final Four where Carolina lost to Marquette in the finals at the Omni, and that would have been in the late 70s, I think. And that was Phil Ford, John Kuster, Mitch Kupchak, Tom Lagarde, and maybe Mike O'Core, maybe something. But anyway, that was that team, and they lost to Al McGuire in his last game as a coach. And in the rest of that Final Four was UNC Charlotte with Cedric Cornbread Maxwell with his famous pretend free throw that he did, his little ritual he went through with his free throws. But Cornbread went on to be I think, 2-time NBA playoff MVP. And he was really very, very good with the Celtics in the 80s. And then since then, he has been a color analyst on their radio or TV, one or the other broadcasts. He's kind of the what Eric Montross is to Jones Angel. Cornbread Maxwell is to whoever broadcasts the Celtic games. And done well. Of course, Jerry Stackhouse has apparently finally turned around Vanderbilt after several years where they basically couldn't fire him because he was black. Now he's actually winning and beat Kentucky twice within a 2-week period 3 weeks ago. He beat them in the regular season, and then he beat them in the semifinals of the SEC tournament. So that's pretty high cotton for Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt to beat Kentucky. So he'll get an extension for life there. And then, of course, Brandon Ingram is an all-star with the New Orleans Pelicans, or whatever they are. I think they're Pelicans. Bullock. So anyway, Kingston is all they talk about when they talk about Kingston basketball was Cedric Maxwell on, and I understand that because my team, a couple of 3 guys played major college, but nobody went to the NBA because back then there were only like 8 teams in the NBA, and that wasn't someone's goal. But Kingston's had and Kingston in the late 50s also had very good basketball, including a guard who went to Wake Forest named Allie Hart, and his guard mate at Wake Forest playing for Bones McKinney was the now late Billy Packer. And their job was to get the ball inside to a guy named Lynn Chappell, who was in the late 50s, maybe 59, 60, somewhere right around there. But Allie Hart came out of Kingston. Same time, there was a player in the 60, 61, 62 named Tommy Maddox, who did very well at NC State. My point is, my generation in Kingston said, hey, we've had really good basketball now for 70 years, and you're only bringing up the last 25 years, 30 years. There's a reason for that, and it fits in with diversity and all that. But anyway, that's the story of Kingston basketball. Talk. I'm trying to take a breath.
No, I was going to say, well, this is a set up for that. You had mentioned there's one of the websites, you don't check out too many websites, but one of them is Clay Travis's Outkick. But another website you check out is The Athletic. And I want to reference that because you wrote an interesting article on the comparisons of Thief for Joy, where you talk about the Athletic article written by Dana O'Neill, which is not a UNCJ school alumni.
They all are. Every sports writer in America went to UNCJ school.
Joe Giglio didn't go to. He was one of those state guys.
Neither did Joe Obius, and neither did Adam Gold, and neither did Andrew Carter, but anyway, neither did the late Carlton Tudor. But anyway, they all did.
Because they hate
people that will swear to that.
Yeah, because they hate everybody's favorite school. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that? For folks who missed that article, you need to go to BobLeeSays.com and check that out. You wrote that article back on the 7th of this month, and I found it to be interesting.
The Athletic is a paywall website. And they were created, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago with the idea that all these sports writers were getting cut loose from their newspapers because the newspapers couldn't afford them anymore. And so they were cutting down their staff. Of course, News Observer did it. Everybody, Greensboro News and Record, everybody across the country did it. Washington Post, New York Times. So you got all these talented writers that couldn't get jobs. So the Athletic hired them. And it's not like Substack. I can talk about Substack too, because my column is now on Substack. But that's just a portal to get things out, like Constant Contact. But anyway, Dana O'Neill is one of the writers, along with I think Peter Gammons is on there. He doesn't write that much. Ken is another baseball writer whose name escapes me. Anyway, they've got a lot. They've got people assigned to beats all over the country. And Dana is, I think, East Coast basketball, and I believe so. Her background is the Big East and Dave Gavitt and all that, back when the Big East was the Big East. But she's definitely not from Carolina. So she might be from Syracuse, which has a prominent journalism school, broadcast journalism school, where Bob Costas came out of, and maybe Dana O'Neill came out of there. But anyway, the column was about the ghost at NC State, and that's been there for 40 years, and they finally buried the ghost. And of course, that goes back to Jimmy V. And she talked about the 82 or 83, the shoe fit Cinderella, Lorenzo Charles big game. They beat Phi Slamma Jam, which was a great event, which subsequently led to Jimmy V getting into the trouble that came about him, caused, of course, by the News Observer, a publisher of which was an ardent Carolina fan. So Frank Daniels Jr. Put this assassination attempt in motion, along with Claude Sitton and Mickey McCarthy, to take down Jimmy V because they saw him as a threat to Dean. Now, of course, people don't realize that Jimmy V and Mike Krzyzewski both came into the ACC in the same year. But anyway, they were successful, of course, in getting rid of Jimmy V. They did not cause his cancer. That's also a rumor that runs around at Amedio's, I think, on Western Boulevard, that Frank Daniels and his crew of journalistic assassins caused Jimmy V's cancer. That's really not the cause of cancer. Giving someone 3 pairs of tennis shoes and some game tickets does not create cancer. But I don't think. But the column was about that, and how since then State, which has had 2 national championships, of course, the David Thompson team in the mid-70s, 74, I think, 75, where they beat Bill Walton, and then the shoe fits situation in 83. So there are not a lot of schools that have won 2 national championships in the modern era. Carolina and Duke obviously have won more than that. Kentucky has, Indiana has, I think. There might be a couple of others, but not a lot of schools have won 2 national championships in the modern era. By modern era, I don't count the Helms thing, that big banner that's hanging in the Dean Dome that everybody says, what the heck? Come on, guys, the Helms thing? Anyway, it's another story. But the column, her story was about, there was a long article, and it went into Les Robinson. It went into, I don't think it mentioned Larry Monteith. And of course, you can't mention Larry Monteith. He was a professor there that got made AD in the middle of this, and he was the one that decided we were only going to recruit basketball players who could do college level work and had a 12th grade reading comprehension, which pretty well eliminated certainly eliminated Chris Washburn and Charles Shackelford, and it might have eliminated the rest of the players that Jimmy was recruiting. I'm not saying that. They kind of said that. But so Jimmy got fired. The book was written and all that. But that really has, State fans have never gotten over that. And they had they had a coaching carousel of I mean, help me here, but it doesn't really matter. Les Robinson, and then Herb Sendak, and then Sidney Lowe, and I think there were a couple of others along, and now with Kevin Keats.
Mark Godfrey came
Mark Godfrey, K-Yow's good friend, who solved this problem. He's not going to be chasing cheerleaders anymore. He's going to be great. Welcome, Mark Godfrey.
What do you mean he's not chasing? Oh, have you seen his Instagram account? He's got pictures of him with these women, and we're not even going to go there. So. Yeah.
Now we're getting into Clay Travis kind of stuff. Let's show some OnlyFans pictures of Mark Godfrey's latest 18-year-old girlfriend. Okay. No.
Yeah, roller skating and some roller rink. But anyway, we're not going to go there.
Speaking of that, did you see? Do you go to Outkick at all?
Occasionally, I've been busy with high school. You were talking about how good Kingston was this year. I'm going to do a plug for Chatham County schools. There were 3 high school teams: Chatham Central, Chatham Charter, Seaforth Girls, and the Northwood Boys were all in the championship game last Saturday. The Seaforth Girls played at UNC and lost. The Northwood Boys and the Chatham Charter Girls played at Reynolds, and they lost too. So we had 3 teams in there, but they all lost. But what I tell the kids
is that because the NCAA put referees who hate Chatham County? Of course it was. That's the only reason your team ever loses.
I have to laugh because on our Chatham Journal Facebook page, I had a picture up of the thing, and there was a comment by somebody who said we lost because of the ref. So yes,
sure. I mean that's not a slam at people, the nice folks at Chatham County. Everybody feels that way. You know, that's why you always lose is the refs. But anyway, the big news that Outkick broke last night, Giselle, and that's just a one word like share, Giselle. How many Giselles do you know? Was supposedly getting it on with a jiu-jitsu instructor in Costa Rica. Now, there you go. You don't hear that every day. Giselle Bunchkin, supermodel, former wife of Tom Brady, was in Costa Rica, and she was seen walking the beach with a handsome young jiu-jitsu instructor who looked like the kind of person that would be J-Lo's 4th or 5th husband. But anyway, so Giselle was supposedly getting it on with him. But they broke the news yesterday that Giselle is now seeing a billionaire, former neighbor of hers and Tom's when they were married in one of their mega mansions around. This guy is a developer, real estate developer, hotelier, billionaire with a B. And they have a picture. This is what I thought was the greatest thing in the whole. They did this whole thing about this guy and a picture of him, a friend of Tom's. And they showed the billionaire, Giselle, Tom, and a couple of other hangers on at a WNBA game. Who the hell goes to a WNBA game? There's the world's greatest quarterback, a billionaire, and a supermodel at a WNBA game. Go figure.
Well, the interesting thing is you've got the woke crowd who picks on, WNBA not being that popular. And it's kind of like, well, maybe if you folks went watch some of those games, maybe the crowds wouldn't be that small.
If all the haters showed up.
Yeah, exactly. If all the haters showed up, maybe you'd have a whole lot more folks showing up.
Well, it's only been in existence for 25 years, and they have yet to show a profit. But it could happen any day now. They're subsidized 100% by the NBA because they were kind of forced to do that. Now, I understand, and I don't really mind it. Other than it's just easy to kick them because it's easy to kick them.
Well, let me ask you this question. I, a while back, have shot the first and second round of the women's and the NCAA tournament when they actually used to have it at big venues. And then a few years ago, they changed it to where the higher seed team is the host team at their own venue. And last year, NC State was at Reynolds, good crowds there. And I saw pictures from the Greensboro Coliseum where, they were selling tickets. You could buy a ticket from StubHub for $4 to go to the Greensboro Coliseum, and that's less than the handling charge on that. Do you see maybe in the future where they're actually moving that those first and second round games to the college campuses
of the men's tournament
on the men's side?
Well, there are a lot of people my age to whom the ticket to the ACC tournament is the ultimate. That's right up there with the ticket to the final round of the Masters and a lot of minds of boosters throughout, certainly the Tobacco Road Big Four, that you had to be giving $10,000 a year to the Rams Club or the Wolfpack Club or the Iron Dukes or the Deacon Club for 20 years to even get your name high enough on the list to get one of the 2,500 incredibly valuable ticket to the ACC tournament. That was, I have a friend who has a friend who knows somebody who got to go to the ACC tournament. And it was, if you got that, people in the community just looked up to you reverently. And this was the regardless of which school you went to. Well, of course, it's not that way anymore because the tournament really doesn't matter. It mattered to maybe a 3 or 4 team like Carolina. If Carolina had made it to the finals, maybe they would not have been the first preseason number 1 to not make it to the tournament and not had to turn down the NIT. History would have been so different. So in that case, the tournament could have mattered because Carolina could have gotten their act together, actually made a 3-point shot, and if Caleb Love shoots 25 of them, he's probably going to make a couple of them. I mean, what are the odds? But it's not what it used to be, and that's because it used to really, 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 really matter. Just ask Tom McMillan and Lefty Driesell and John Lucas if it matters, because they lost the greatest ACC tournament game ever played to David Thompson's team, who the next 2 weeks played in that same Greensboro Coliseum and beat Bill Walton in what was not the finals, but the semifinals. And then I think they beat Marquette. I think it was Marquette they beat in the finals. But that, you can win bar bets on the fact that the Bill Walton, David Thompson game was not a finals game. It was a semifinals. And had they not beaten Maryland in the greatest game ever played in ACC tournament history, they would have never gotten. They would have had to go to the NIT. Oh my God! Well,
I've been fortunate to be able to shoot. I did shoot this last ACC men's tournament. I've shot a couple previous ones a bunch of years ago, and I've definitely noticed you just don't have the same crowds. I mean, Virginia Tech travels pretty well. There was a crowd for Duke. There was a crowd for UNC. But, Miami and some of those other schools, they just don't really show up. And I guess, and I asked some of the sports writers there, because it's interesting you're talking about sports writers. I've got a couple of my favorites, but I find that when I'm sitting in a group of sports writers and as a photographer, I just sit and listen. It comes across very clearly that each one of them thinks that they're the smartest sports writer around. But their thing is, you may not have the attendance.
I'm an internet legend, don't you?
Yes, I know you're an internet.
That's true. I'm not making that up. I am an internet. Go ahead.
But I was going to say, their take is, even though you don't have the crowds in there, it's still not going to go away because of TV money. It fills up programming for live sports, which I think, from a TV perspective, is still one of the revenue generators for them out there.
Well, you talk about revenue generating. We were talking about how the nation hates Carolina as much as they hate Duke, and apparently that's been proven true with what's happened the last few weeks. If that's true, why do the 2 regular season Carolina Duke basketball games, which have been, both of them are telecast nationally and have been for as long as I can remember, and they draw huge audiences? Why does some Jamoke in Kalamazoo or Valdosta or Fresno want to watch 2 schools that he hates? I don't know.
Well, maybe they hate one school more than they hate another school.
Can Carolina pass Duke as the most hated school in America? It's we were talking about those schools, and when I was talking to my friend from Purdue, I got into the fact that, and I think this is an important point to those people at Carolina who think Carolina has a divine right to be a basketball elite. The people at Indiana used to think that too, and then they got rid of Bobby Knight, and they fell off the ledge, and they still have not really recovered. They got a decent team this year, but for years they didn't make the tournament because they went through a series of coaches. And but I remember back when this would have been in the 60s and 70s and probably into the 80s, that the big recruits, the super recruits, the number 1 top 5 6-star guys would always consider Kentucky, Indiana, UCLA, Carolina, and then when Krzyzewski came along, Duke. And they would consider those 5. And if any one of those 5 was after a player, the other 4 would be after it. Of course, Eric Montross was going to Indiana because he was from Indiana. And I think there was another guy, and he had a tall brother who was not Tyler Hansbrough. There was another 7-footer at Carolina.
Zeller.
Huh?
Zeller. And he had a brother who was also a good player. Yeah.
And he came out of Indiana. But in the old days, Bobby Knight would have locked them down. Got a great story about locking them down. I don't think I've told you this one. The University of Missouri, talking about J schools, the University of Missouri had the first gentleman's school in America. My daughter went there 15 years ago, and they had their 100th anniversary while she was a student there. And so my wife and I went out there and to do that. My wife had taught there in the mid 70s. My wife had taught advertising at the University of Missouri Journalism School. So this was when, right at the end of the Tyler Hansbrough era, so whatever year that was, 2008, 2009, somewhere when the Tyler Hansbrough and Danny Green and that bunch was playing. So they're having these series of seminars that the students and the alumni could attend, talking about journalism and the new millennium and whatnot. And they had this one panel discussion, and it had the Missouri AD, it had Norm Stewart, who was in the process of retiring, who was a longtime Missouri basketball coach. It had John Anderson, who was an ESPN Sports Center guy, and a couple of others. So they give their speeches, and they open it up for questions. I'm up in the back, and up in the back row, the cheap seats there in this classroom, elevated classroom auditorium thing. And I raised my hand, I get called on, and they said, identify yourself. And I said, my name is Bob Lee. I'm from the Triangle of North Carolina, and I just want to see that Tyler Hansbrough sends his regards to everyone in the Show Me State. Well, Tyler Hansbrough, as you know, came out of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and was the biggest recruit in the history of Missouri, not counting St. Louis and Kansas City. And that Carolina got him was one of the reasons Norm Stewart was retiring. Tyler Hansbrough sends his regards to everyone in the Show Me State. And one of my daughter's classmates was in the room. I didn't know this till later. And he texted my daughter, your dad just took over the room. So anyway, a little aside there. You want to bar bet with that too.
No, it's good.
Tyler Hansbrough in regards to Missouri.
It's good to see you're causing waves all across the country.
Absolutely, cause trouble wherever I go.
Again, what's your feel for ACC? And I think you mentioned, you got Kevin Keats, and he's not having to deal with Krzyzewski or Roy anymore. What's your general feel of the lay of the land when it comes to ACC basketball here in the Triangle?
Well, I think you have to. There's several things that are affecting it. No one really knows yet the full impact of NIL in the portal, and that has changed everything. That happened to take place at the same time Roy decided that he'd rather play basketball than recruit, and so he retired. And Hubert comes in. Somebody was going to come in. It was going to be Matt Doherty 2.0. It was going to be Wes Miller. It was going to be Hubert. It was going to be it wasn't going to be Larry Brown. So anyway, Roy retired. Now, did Roy retire because of NIL in the portal and he couldn't do it his way anymore? Which is, Boeheim has basically said the same thing. He went off on a tangent several weeks ago that Wake Forest had bought their team. Wake Forest has bought the basketball team. I don't think anybody would have ever thought those words would have ever been uttered, but they were. And so those guys, they realize that the whole landscape of college basketball has changed because of the NIL and transfer. Keats' program, and I cannot name, including this year's team, and I'm 2 miles away from the arena, a state basketball player of the last 5 years. I just don't follow it that closely. I have nothing against him, but I just don't follow him. And so, but apparently a lot of his players this year will transfer portal players. So the coaches that can work the portal and have the NIL bucks, and I don't know who is backing State's NIL program. I mean, people like say Wendell Murphy and whatnot, but I don't know who is the sugar daddy that's keeping that coffers full so they can give out stuff more than you get free lasagna at Emilio's and whatever people are getting to go to NC State, I don't know. I mean, when Baycott was driving around some fancy European car, I think was his deal. And I don't know what the Love and Davis and Leaky Black were getting, but apparently something. So whoever's getting that, I know the person who was in charge of Duke. I can't give you his name, but a friend of mine is in charge of Duke's collective, I think they call it. And they're really concentrating more on their Olympic sports over there and paying the student athletes over that more than they are basketball. They leave basketball alone. Apparently basketball already had a pay-to-go program worked out, and the guy said, well, we don't need to do that. They've got Coach K had a program set up where he got all the players' parents' jobs at Durham Life Insurance or whatever it was. That's far be it for me to cast aspersions at Duke program. But so the future of the ACC, the future of college basketball is up in the air, and we're seeing it now in the tournament. And these guys are going to transfer out. You've got situations like Alabama, and that's a whole such discussion in itself about what happened at Alabama. And yes, they should have suspended that kid, and they would have suspended Brandon Miller had he been anybody other than Brandon Miller. You know what I'm talking about. We can talk about that if you want to. But so is NC State the new powerhouse? No. Is Miami the new powerhouse? What about Virginia? Can Tony Bennett, whatever his state of mind right now, there are probably people in Charlottesville ready to shoot him, because when you go to the AC tournament and then the NCAA March Madness, he either wins it or he gets eliminated in the first round. He doesn't make it to the second. He's never made it to the second round or third round. He's been eliminated in the first round 3 times by teams that were 10 spots below him. Of course, one year he was a 16 beat him, and now 10 or 12, whatever it was, that beat him yesterday. Oh, I guess second. Anyway, so I'm sure there are people up there that they probably wouldn't want Hubert, but they would take somebody. And speaking of that, let's say a word of remembrance for Terry Holland, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, who, of course, was a longtime coach at Virginia. Do you know, and I just skip around here, I just stream of consciousness, do you know what Terry Holland's dog's name was and why?
No, I have no idea what Terry Holland's dog's name was.
He named it Dean because it cried all night long. True story, Gene. Terry Holland's dog was named Dean because it whined all night long.
Someone's going to have to fact check that. You're gonna watch. There's going to be a little warning that's going to pop up on the screen.
I don't know if he's still living. I haven't talked to him in a while. Rick Brewer is still around, and Chansky would know. Ask Chansky. I know he's still around. He'll be around forever. Ask Chansky that this story. Terry Holland named his dog Dean because it cried and whined all night long.
Yeah, I mean.
Anyway, Terry Holland died. I think a week ago. He'd been the AD at Davidson. He played for Davidson. Terry Holland was on Lefty Driesell's great team at Davidson in the early '60s that propelled Lefty Driesell to go to Maryland and make them the UCLA of the East. But that was because of the great teams he'd had at Davidson, and Terry Holland was part of one of those great teams. I could name all 5 of them, but that would be overly impressive. You with my knowledge.
Go for it.
Huh?
I said go for it. I mean, Mr. Holland.
Fred Haskell, Donald Davidson, Dick Snyder, Terry Holland, and Barry Teague.
There you go.
And I've never set foot on the Davidson campus in my life.
Yeah, I didn't have any interaction with him when he was up in Virginia, but I did run into him several times when he was over at ECU, and he always seemed to have a composure about himself whenever he was dealing with whether it was fans or students or just about anybody.
He was a really good guy. The only reason Carolina people hate him is because he beat them a few times, but had Ralph Sampson, and he was had a good program during that length of time. And Carolina fans hate people who ever beat them, which doesn't mean everybody, but it means a lot of people have beat them a few times. But what am I saying earlier? That there used to be these blue bloods that dominated college basketball. Now, one, you had UCLA, which was a blue blood of itself when it dominated for 7 years. But even then, it was Indiana with Bobby Knight, Kentucky with Adolph Rupp, and then Joe B. Hall. And then I'm leaving out one. Well, UCLA, of course, they went through a series of coaches. They had a big drop-off after John Wooden with Glenn Bartow, Glenn Cunningham, Walt Hazard. They went through a bunch of them. So the fact that Carolina could be entering that stage, because they don't have a Roy. Remember, Roy was supposed to replace Guthridge after Guthridge got his 3 years in for his pension, and I don't begrudge Dean for setting it up that way, but he wanted Bill Guthridge to get a good pension, so he gave him 3 years. Then they were supposed to bring in Roy. Roy chose not to come back. They go for the who else can we get, and grabbed Matt Doherty out of 1 year out of Notre Dame. He came in, and the rest was history there. And then Roy decided to come back in. Roy took the Phil Bingston rule, which is never replace the legend, replace the guy, replace the legend. So Phil Bingston replaced Vince Lombardi and lasted 2 years and was fired. So Matt Doherty essentially replaced Smith Guthridge. Look at that as one program. And of course, that didn't work out. And then Roy comes in. And Roy was, maybe goofy old Roy, and I think he became a caricature of himself the last 5 years as coach, but that's my opinion. He was a legitimate Hall of Fame coach, and he won three national championships. I think 2 or 3. I think he won 3. Can't tell you a single player on the last one, and he almost won the other one had Villanova missed that Hail Mary. So Roy was a gentleman Hall of Fame coach, knew what he was doing. And Hubert could be a really good coach, but 99% of the coaches in major college basketball, Gene, are not Hall of Fame coaches. You're not guaranteed to have a Hall of Fame coach. And most everybody that coaches at major college level knows how to coach basketball. They know what a ball screen is. I don't, but they do. And if they get real good players, a real good coach does real good. And the blue blood coaches did. Boeheim stopped getting them a few years ago, and so that's one of the reasons I think he decided he might leave. And then within 10 minutes, the people at Syracuse said, "That's a good idea, Jim. Why don't you leave?" Particularly in Greensboro, where they hate you anyway, and go do something in Greensboro. Although there is nothing to do in Greensboro, according to Boeheim 7 or 8 years ago. It was ironic that he picked Greensboro to retire in.
It was, and I think the last press conference, he said he implied that a couple of weeks earlier he had pretty much announced his retirement, but no one seemed to notice. And I think Brett Freelander, who writes the Saturday Roads columns, mentioned that he had turned into that crotchety old uncle that you didn't invite to your family reunions anymore because he was just way too annoying.
I did a column in the last, I think it was a week ago. I actually did it. I said, is there anybody in America other than Syracuse people who like Jim Boeheim? He had a crotchety way about him, and he was either picking his nose or pushing his glasses up on his nose, and he wasn't a warm and cuddly guy. He may have been in person, but his public persona, which is all most of us know, was this kind of crotchety, kind of constipated guy who obviously could coach and was there forever. I mean, I think he was there when Jim Brown was playing lacrosse at Syracuse. I mean, he remembers Ernie Davis. He goes way back. He was a student there and literally never lived outside of Syracuse, New York. But he was in his 70s. Did you know that Dean, I think I'm right on this, was 62 when he retired?
No, I don't.
Hey, everybody's going into their 70s. Mike was 75. Roy was 73. And Dean was 62.
Well, everyone's living a little longer. Going back to what you said, don't follow a legend. Are you saying there's a serious danger that Hubert won't be around after the next couple of years?
Well, sure. The way you phrase that, yeah. I mean, he won't. I'm going to say this and realize I have no vote in the matter. If he leaves now or in the next month or 2 months, whatever, it's because he's decided he really doesn't like the pressure of the job. And now he sees what the pressure is when you don't. I mean, I think the worst thing that happened to Stuart Hubert's career was last March when he went on this miracle run and everybody assumed, okay, no worry. Roy's been replaced by Hubert. Hubert's fine. We're going to be in the finals every year. And that's not going to be the case. And certainly they went the other way now. Had you reversed the years, and last year Hubert had not gotten in anywhere, it's been this year. And then this year, suddenly they win and go on. If you just reverse the 2 years, everybody loves Hubert. Everybody loved Hubert last April. He was a toast to Franklin Street. Yay, Hubert! Not now. And you could see it going down over the course of the year when they started out and they lost those 4 games in December against good teams. And remember, they played Alabama with the murderer accomplice to the murder to a 4 overtime game. They could have beaten Alabama, now the number 1 team in America. So there was a time this year when the Carolina team was capable of beating, quote, anybody. And I don't know what happened. I'm not aware of the chemistry of the team. I don't know whether Caleb Love and R.J. Davis were fighting over a girlfriend. I don't know any of that. I'm not part of that. I really don't care. I'm glad Carolina's players don't kill 23-year-old single mothers on Franklin Street at 3 a.m. in the morning. I would hate that. But I don't know the problems with the team. I don't know. I do have one suggestion, and Bubba hasn't asked me. I think, no, he didn't, but I think maybe I offered a suggestion anyway. I think one of the mistakes that Hubert might have made was surrounding himself with an all Carolina staff. if everybody in your company, in your board of directors, whatever, thinks the same way, you don't need half of them. You don't need any of them. You just need one of them. If everybody comes from the same background, sees the same solutions to the same problems, why do you need 7 people that think that way? I never knew there were that many shaved-head white guys in America as there are on the Carolina coaching staff. My goodness, they're all tall white guys with no hair. I don't know. Turned out that way. I just noticed things like that. But, you got Lebo and you got Fredericks and you got May, who's not a tall white guy with a shaved head. But anyway, you got all these guys that are Carolina guys, and you got nobody that says, when we had this problem at Gonzaga, or we had this problem at Kansas, we had this problem wherever, here's what we did. And hey, wow, that's a good idea. Let's try that. There was nobody who had that. Now, Lebo was at a number of different places. I think he was the head coach at 3 different schools. I want to say Auburn and East Carolina was his final stop. And he was somewhere before then. I want to say maybe Wichita State, although that may have been Fogler. But anyway, Lebo was the head coach at other places, has experience. But still, they're all Carolina guys. And I just think that's a mistake. Roy didn't do that. He had Robinson. He had Bob Holliday. They'd been with him at Kansas. So then, I think that might have been the mistake that Hubert did, was surround our people with people who know every shop on Franklin Street and know the second verse of Hark the Sound. And I think that's a mistake that could easily be corrected by a couple of guys deciding they were going to do something else with the rest of their lives and choose to leave, kind of like Dre Bly. Dre Bly is a good example. Mac hires Dre Bly, the greatest defensive back in the history of North Carolina. And he turned out he wasn't a real good coach. Great players do not normally make great coaches because they assume the players have the same skills, innate skills that they had, and they don't. So it's hard for them to coach people who can't react the way they react. And Dre Bly was probably a good example of that. There may have been other issues, I don't know, but that's a good example of, well, he was a great star here, so we're going to bring him back and he's going to produce great defensive backs. And that wasn't the case. And he chose to leave, and or Mac chose to tell him to leave, or however that happened. But anyway, I'm putting it back on basketball. I think he should have brought in some new blood or some different blood from outside to bring new ideas to his staff. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the next few weeks. What about you? You think that? You agree with that?
No, that's a good assessment. I hadn't really thought about that. We're kind of in the last 4 or 5 minutes here. I want to wrap it up. Last year when we talked, you had mentioned your interest in basketball, college basketball had gone down. I think you mentioned in one of your recent columns, your wife's school is out, right. So that's half of your interest gone there. But I think the one comment that you made last year was the reference to people just don't know who the players are anymore because of NIL, the transfer portal, and people are now cheering uniforms versus players. So what do you see happening in college basketball over the next 2 to 5 years?
The same thing. Now you've still got the one and done because they can still have, I think the real rule right now, they still have to play 1 year before they're 18 after their high school or something. The NBA have not changed their rule. They've talked about it. So they still, you cannot have any more Kobe's or guys or Shaq's leaving. Well, of course, Shaq played at LSU. Anyway, the Kobe's or the LeBrons that skip college altogether. They can't do that. So they still have to play somewhere for a year. I think the Duke team now is playing 4 freshmen, I believe. I could be wrong there. I think the one guy, Roach, maybe is not a freshman. I don't know. I'm way out of my league here. So Duke has continued to do it. Now, people think of one and done. They think of Calipari. How many national championships has Calipari won in, I think, 10 years of doing one and done at Kentucky? 1. Kentucky people know that. And if he gets beat tonight or tomorrow, he's in trouble, or next week, he's in trouble when he gets back home because they can't put up with that. But he's only won 1 national championship with all his 5 stars. And so I see that continuing to happen. And it's going to be just like quarterbacks, recruiting quarterbacks. The best guy to recruit for a football team is a 3-star quarterback that doesn't mind holding a clipboard for 2 or 3 years to get a free college education, because the 4 or 5-star is not going to hold a clipboard. And so they're going to be gone. If you recruit 2 5-star quarterbacks, one of them's going to be gone probably middle of the freshman year. And that's going to happen in basketball too. These guys, the Nichols kid that transferred out of Carolina, he was recruited by other schools. I think he was 3 stars or something, but it may be more. I don't know. Don't follow recruiting. He'll go somewhere else and play. And Stylen will probably go somewhere else and play because they want to play, and they can't showcase themselves, and their agent or their uncle or whatever is telling them they could be in the NBA if the damn coach would just play them. Playing on the bench, they don't want to do that. It's just, why are they there? They're not there to get an education. They're there to showcase their basketball talents. So to your question, I think they're going to continue to see a lot of just guys you don't know. I really can't name, other than Zion, I can't name any of the Duke one and dones. I probably could if I think Kyrie Irving and whatnot. There are a couple of others, Rivers, I think. But I can't name all the centers they had over the years with Mike's one and dones. That's what the top players, the 5 stars, are not there to play 2 or 3 years. They're there to showcase themselves for 1 year and then make their millions in the deal. Now, the NIL could make it worth their while to stay if they're not projected to be a top draft choice, and that'll be a factor. But I don't know. I think Hubert's got 2 or 3 5 stars that are coming in this year, and they'll all be new. I think I read somewhere that Baycott could stay another year. He's got a 7th or an 8th year or something silly with all the COVID stuff, and he could stay again. I don't know why he would. He's got basically a lot of records, and I don't think the offense. Again, I'm way out of my league here. I don't think the offense that Carolina plays showcases his NBA skills, and he's still not projected to be a lottery pick. So I don't know what he will do. He seems like a nice guy. I don't know the other guys, but Baycott, and if you've ever had any dealings with him, seems like a really solid young man. I give him credit for it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things turn out. Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up because we're coming up. We just hit 1 o'clock, but spring football, maybe if we get together again in April, we can talk about football, and maybe you're one of your favorite people, Skippy. We can talk about his suggestion that you
be the cokehead.
Yeah. So I think that might be a good conversation.
You don't have time. I am still in favor of the Southern Ivies, the boutique ACC Southern Ivy Conference. My little deal with the Pac-12 combination was just to get people riled up, which it did. So I'm not really in favor of Skippy's plan, but I know how to make it work if we have to do the Skippy plan. But yeah, we can talk in April. Give me a call, and we'll see if we can figure out how to hook it up. We got it hooked up today, by the way.
Yes, we did, and I apologize to everybody. I know I missed talking with you, but I've had multiple technical issues, and it was kind of like I did not want to put out a product out there that didn't make for technical reasons, you would have been showing up as stuttering or pixelated and all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, let's look forward to next month. I'm going to end stream, but Bob, just stay on for a second while I do that, because I just need to do some housekeeping.
Sure.
Folks, thanks for watching.